Feminisms. I'm Andrea Plaid, and this is my bro love.
I'm Chris McDonald Dennis.
And we are here to talk for our very first vidcast. How are we feeling, Chris?
We are, you know what it is? Well, where I am, it's kind of a sunny day. It is September, my favorite month. And you know what? We are having our first vidcast. We're going to show people what you and I have been doing for years. Just kikiing and having lots of opinions about lots of things. So I'm excited.
Yes. Yeah. I'm so for this. So why are we doing this, Chris? I mean, like you said, you're going to see us doing a lot of kikiing, offering a lot of opinions and just being us and our usness and our fabulous Gen Xness. So, but that's just us being Gen X. But why are we really doing this vidcast?
Well, I think for me and for you, as we were talking, we were realizing that, there were lots of podcasts out there and there was a lot of conversation going on around how different groups were seeing the world. And like always happens, Gen X really wasn't being included. And I remember you and I even having a conversation that, we really didn't necessarily feel so comfortable with that term Gen X. And we will get into that in later shows about why folks of color might not working class folks. But then there were generations like baby boomers and millennials that were feeling really pulled to those generational terms. And we're like, well, let's unpack, what does it mean to be Gen X? And let's talk about what was our experience like, even if we may not always call ourselves Gen X, even if we didn't think of it. And let's, in academia, we call it problematize, but let's talk about what are the things that we experienced from apartheid to John Hughes.
And everything in between, and even outside of those things. I do think that when we talk about Gen X, I think of, the fight around apartheid. It was also the burgeoning movement of the third wave feminism. We're also talking about the ideas of queer theory going into academia, because remember, it was all on the streets for decades. And also we were the generation, or we are the generation that came up with AIDS, HIV and AIDS.
Yep. And
all of the different ways we had to protect ourselves. So, yes. And we are the generation, we are the loving generation. Truly, we are the desegregated, and not only desegregated as far as socially, but also romantically. It's not that there were not other people who were not dating and having partners and having babies, but they were all in very different contexts. So now with loving being the law of the land, and desegregation being the law of the land, now we can desegregate our intimate lives. So we were the beneficiaries of that. And also which came out of loving was also marriage equality. Yep. So all of those, so again, when we got to see that whole span of these very monumental things going on.
Oh, sorry about that. This is another thing that the audience should know, is that we do a lot of oh, no, you go ahead. We'll try not to do that too much. But one of the things that I often joke about with people is how, as a gay man, I was born exactly a week before Stonewall.
Oh, wow.
And I think of what that was like. I was born when my homosexuality was considered a mental illness.
Yep.
Was criminal. And now I am married to my husband. That is when I think of that, it's it's just,
yes.
I mean, how, just to think of that, it's wow. So I do think that in many ways, we are the guinea pig generation in many ways.
I think that's a perfect way to describe that. We are the the desegregated, loving generation guinea pigs. How is this all going to look? How's it all going to work out? And I'll give another example of the loving generation, being the guinea pig. And I think I've told you this story before. is another big thing that was part of Gen X was Live Aid, the big concert for relief, for hunger relief in Ethiopia, I think it was.
Yep.
So Live Aid was going on. We're also the MTV generation. Remember, we were the guinea pigs for that one, and to see all of its permutations. So Live Aid was on, and my mom and my ex-stepdad, both from the South, Mississippi, and they were going out for the evening. My mom looks at the TV, and I don't know who was on. I think it was Tina Turner, David Bowie, somebody was on. And she looked at the TV, she looked at me, she looked at TV, and she looked at me, and she said, "There will be no white boys in this house." And she turned and she walked out to enjoy her date night with my ex-stepdad. And I thought, well, one, that's not going to stop me. But two,
Right.
That idea of that generational split of where my mom would never consider a white man as a partner, to me being able to say, yeah, my partner would be a white man. And eventually I did marry someone who was white.
Yep.
So so that split of that generational idea of who is considered who can be considered a partner and for what reason. So again, that's another part of the loving generation.
Right.
To now, all kinds of people are all kinds of permutation and marriages between races, religions is normal. It's normalized. And
Right.
to the point that you have things like Scandal and you saw that on television, to the Cheerios commercial, which caused all of this drama, which was just this mixed race family and this little mixed race girl just being her, being a little girl. Right. And again, that caused all that drama. Yep. So those were also the other ways that we are part of the loving generation.
And you know what? One of the things that I think that many of our parents didn't. So of course, I grew up as a mixed race person and has long history with that. But there were prices that my family paid. What's interesting for me as you've told me that story, and one of the things that I find fascinating is that your mother never shared with you, growing up in Mississippi, she couldn't have picked a white man. Like, a white man could have picked her. Like,
and when you mean by pick is
exactly so there was never that conversation of like, I am fearful for you about what that could do for you. It's like there was just this conversation like this, like, you will not do it. And of course you, in a very different context at that age, not understanding, being like, I can do whatever I want, not understanding like, oh, maybe this woman was acting out of trauma, and she didn't even know it, because I have many friends like who, especially Black fathers, when their Black daughters came home with white men, and they were from the South. And what it was is it was about deep fear. It was like, oh my God, it was, this man will hurt you. This man will do something. And
and we it's just have that.
But we didn't do that. Like, we didn't have those, like, people don't realize that, I think especially younger generations don't realize, like, we didn't have those conversations with our parents. We just were like, oh, we were, like you said, we were the guinea pig. So it was like, oh, we've opened the doors, so now you go through.
Right.
But we're not going to prepare you, because we don't actually, because our parents didn't know what we could
prepare us for.
Yeah.
Well, they understood it as, at least for my mom, it was white folks are okay. That's how she was. There are some white folks who are okay. Yeah. Quote, but the end of that sentence is, but for the most part, they're not. And you need to watch your back and you need to be careful, because they will hurt you. Yeah. And not just emotionally, they will physically hurt you. Because remember, my mom came out of the generations of lynching.
Yes.
As a normal thing. That when we had relatives who were ran out of town was under the threat of lynching.
Right.
And that story was multiplied by several families, several thousand families from the South, and not even just the South. I mean, how many Black families up north had that one relative who had to skate out of town because the way they were being offended white folks, and they heard about the white folks going to come after them. They're like, you got to go. We'll ship you off anywhere we need to do. You got to go stay with auntie so-and-so, uncle so-and-so, grandma so-and-so, big mama so-and-so, because we got to keep you safe.
Okay, you did not say big mama. I love that, big mama so-and-so.
Big mama, nana, whoever, but we got to get you out of town. No. You got to go out. You got to go.
And what's interesting is I also want to connect it to other minoritized groups. So I'm also thinking as a gay man, how when I came out and I met older gay men who had been together since like World War II and things like that. And when they met me and they could not understand my being out. They were like, what? No, you hide. How? You will be killed.
You will
be killed. And it was and I remember I remember when I was in college, I was the only openly gay person on campus. And I remember going through some pretty horrific things and some of those older men not being able to be sympathetic to me. And my being really hurt because it was like, well, what did you expect? And at the time I was like, how could you do that? You're blaming the victim. And it's taken me years to be like, we don't get, in many ways, I think they want to say, we don't get to act like that. It's like you were, and I think it came from a place of fear. So that is interesting how we had to contend with those things, but we didn't understand it and we weren't equipped. And of course we were young people. And I know you and I, Andrea, we were like, oh, we're going to do what we're going to do.
Because we us now.
Because we're us. So, but also we hit our heads probably a lot of times and went through things but that's part of growing up too, but we really were part of that generation that it was like we're just trying it on our own and
we're trying on this world that y'all fought for. And what we didn't understand was y'all fought for this, right? I mean, you fought for integration. How did you think integration was going to go? And I think they understood, but I think they didn't understand.
Right.
So they didn't know what to prepare. Like you're saying, they didn't know what to prepare us for because they didn't quite know there were unintended consequences to what they were actually fighting for. It's like, okay, so we have this integrated space, but that means that our kids are going to be, for example, exploring music that we had to enjoy on the down low. And we weren't going to admit, at least our quote unquote, or at least for me, at least our Blackness was questioned.
Yeah.
So you can enjoy Sam Cooke and you can enjoy the Temptations, but Jimi Hendrix, not so much. Let alone the Doors, let alone Led Zeppelin.
Yeah, exactly. Well,
because go on. I'm sorry.
Well, I was also going to say one of the things that I think also we did not understand is that we had this idea that everything was getting better. And I think that we also didn't understand because you and I, we were born in the same year.
Yes. 69, the best year ever. No.
Yes, 1969. It was a pretty momentous year. But, we were 11 when Ronald Reagan became president. And did we know that really was going to be the beginning of I would say kind of the backlash, when he, he, starts his campaign in Philadelphia, Mississippi, where Schwerner, Cheney, and,
it's not Schwartz.
The other man, the 3 civil rights workers were killed. That was on purpose. It's like we did not understand that it was affirmative action, everything that we had thought was going to be great. It was, and I think our parents didn't understand that either. It was I think lots of us were like, okay, we're going to hope this man is, we're not quite sure, but I don't think that we realized,
Yeah, but I also think that well, let me say in my household, because one of the things I'm thankful to my ex-stepdad for was introducing me to journalism and reading newspapers and watching the news. And so I remember, and of course, they were union people, big
Yep.
union
Yes.
people.
Yep.
So to see see Ronald Reagan decimate the airstrike, the
Yep.
air traffic controller strike was a huge thing.
Yes.
To see how the auto industry went down because they tore up the unions, and of course they were always talking about Jimmy Hoffa and the unions were bad. And, I mean, I remember all of that rhetoric, and I remember that it's like, this was wrong. If it wasn't, and like I tell people, if it wasn't for unions, I would not have grown up the way that I did.
Right. Right.
So
right.
there's that. And I also remember it was under Reagan that I actually formed my first political consciousness, which is around abortion.
Yep.
And I remember having this argument with my ex-stepdad, and he was trying to be pro-life. And I was like, no, I do not think that a woman should be forced to have a child. I think a woman should have the right to not have a child, and she has a right to terminate that pregnancy.
Yeah.
That's it. And he was like, you had a cogent thought around, like a whole cogent
Right.
thought. It wasn't mean, but he was just like, you thought about this, you reasoned this out. And it's like, okay, now he might not like me being a feminist, and I did challenge him, but that's neither here nor there. But it did form a certain consciousness in me, and that was under Reagan. And as we were getting older, we started knowing about, his position on apartheid. We started finding out about the whole the Contra-Iran affair and all of that BS. So we came into a political consciousness under Reagan that made us kind of go left, literally.
Right.
Go left.
And what's interesting is, so my family was, I'm trying to think who my dad was union, was also, for me, the same thing with the political consciousness. When I am saying is I don't think that we saw that it was the beginning of kind of this movement toward, I actually believe that there's a line from Ronald Reagan to Donald Trump.
Oh, absolutely.
For me, it was, I think that we thought like, oh, there is this, because there's this horrible guy.
Right. And then there's like horrible light with George H. Bush.
Exactly. But then when I look at but then Bill Clinton, and we can talk about the Clinton years. Now I'm just like, I was never a huge Clinton fan anyway, because that whole let's be Republican light and.
Right. And, and under him, we had Don't Ask, Don't Tell.
We had welfare. We basically ended welfare.
Yep. 3 strikes you're out. That's how we got the incarceration, the prison industrial complex that as we know it, was under Clinton. But at the time, this goes back to being the desegregated generation. He was on Arsenio Hall playing the saxophone. All right, Bill Clinton. And remember, Toni Morrison infamously said that he was the first Black president. And everybody was like, ooh. At the time, we're like, okay. They were like, oh. But at the back of my mind, like,
he's had Black friends doesn't mean. I mean, he was comfortable around Black people. That was nice. More than any other white president. Like, clearly he had significant relationship with Black people. Great.
But those were individual Black people. We didn't connect that individuals doesn't mean the whole community. He didn't like Black folks. He liked individuals, but he didn't like Black folk community.
Because remember, he was very big about putting certain Black people in his place. Jesse Jackson, Sister Souljah.
Yep. At the same time, he had Bernie Jordan.
And remember he fly down to Arkansas to make sure that he was there at a I think a death penalty case. For some reason there was something, it was like he wanted to make sure that he was there showing but I remember there was the Clinton way that they were convincing the rest of us.
Yep.
That that was the only way the Democrats won. And I will still say the only reason Bill Clinton won is because Ross Perot with those big ears. He split the vote. That's what it was. It wasn't anything special about you, Bill. It was Ross Perot with those big ears and those. Remember he had those charts.
Yes. Bless his heart. But Ross Perot was the introduction to third party politics that never ever quite worked. It was Ross Perot, then it became Ralph Nader. I mean, we grew up with all of that. But yes, Reagan, I mean, how many, getting back to Reagan, how many conservatives now talk about the Reagan Revolution as if that was the thing? Because that's where it gelled. That's where the conservative baby boomers became a thing. Because remember, for those from like, okay, so the 80s, so back in the 60s, so we're going 60s to 80, for 20 years, it was the liberal left-leaning baby boomers that occupied the pop culture, mass culture consciousness with Woodstock and free love and going into the forest and Earth Day. It was that group of people. And then the 80s came because they were also coming up. They were all 20 and getting into 30 too. Teenagers, 20, 30. When Reagan hit, they became the yuppies and always chasing money and then came like this entrenched conservatism that were like, we thought that y'all were about peace and love. What just happened right here? Where did this 180 come from? But that's what happened. So with that became, and so that happened. And then with Reagan, like the conservative side of baby boomers started blooming. And we're dealing with these kind of not even a bloom anymore. It's more like Frankenstein's monster just kind of is taking over the land. Because now we're dealing with Trumpism, which came out of Reaganism.
Oh, in the 80s. I mean, Trump, you and I lived through that. I mean,
my God.
I mean, remember Wall Street, the movie, greed is good. I mean, you and I lived through greed is good.
Greed is good. And Gordon Gekko and Michael Douglas being dressed a certain way. And Donald Trump, in a lot of ways, was the real life version of Gordon Gekko. But we thought, but it was Reagan, it was go-go 80s. And we remember Donald Trump, he told us, we warned us about himself back in the day when he took out that big ass ad, excuse my language, but that big ass ad about the exonerated five. And that back then known as the Central Park Five. Or just those boys back then. He was like, we should bring back the death penalty because of those boys. I mean, he called for their heads in so many ways. And we lived through that, So we knew about Trump. And I think the Gen Xers knew about Trump. We knew about Trump. We knew him as, yes, the go-go New York mogul, but we also knew him as kind of the pop culture joke. And
he was, we knew that the only reason he was rich was because he knew how to work the system. He was a hustler. We knew that he was just a really good hustler. And the 80s was really good at regulating everything. Having two loops the size of, I don't know what, the size of a, helium balloon, like a...
Basically.
Exactly. Like just huge loops. And he just knew how to work the system.
And, come to find out that, as it's been coming out in the news now, we knew that he was, because he kept trying to say he was self-made, and now we're finding out that his dad gave him a good million. So again, it's inherited wealth. His dad was the self-made man, but his son, Donald Trump, is not.
Right.
And none of his kids are. So we're talking about intergenerational wealth. But remember, Donald Trump was the art of the deal. He was that guy, remember? And
oh my God, I forgot about that book.
Yes, the art of the deal. But Trump was our Gordon Gekko. He was the real life version of Gordon Gekko. And also during the 80s, speaking of going back to the conservatives, this is when they built their infrastructure out with talk radio. And this is when they coalesced the religious right, and how Phyllis Schlafly was able to mobilize. And even though she was the 70s, it became a staple and a mainstay in the 80s of how she was able to use the church bulletin in white conservative churches to spread the gospel of conservatism.
Oh, she was I loved when her son came out of the closet. I was like, see, that's what happens. That's what happens.
Y'all doing too much.
You're doing too much.
You're
What
talking,
did Chris
like
Rock say?
You're talking off, right. You're talking off cash crazy.
What did Chris Rock say? Don't hate Puerto Ricans, because guess what? Your daughter's going to come home saying, I'm married a Puerto Rican.
And then what? And then what?
And then what you going to do?
Then what you going to do?
But right. Yeah, I think, but also we live through, when you talk about books, I'm thinking of also we live through the really contentious wars, I would say, or arguments.
Yes.
Intra-community. So one of the things when you talk about books, I was thinking of one of I think both of our favorite books, The Color Purple.
Yeah.
And how Black men dogged Alice Walker. Like Ishmael Reed, I still can't. Like, I will never really be a fan of him because of, like, he just was, like, so, yeah.
But like he made his reputation off of that.
Yeah, like the book and then the movie and stuff like that. It was just
and it was also remember The Black Man's Guide to the Black Woman by Scheherazade Ali.
Oh my God, on Phil Donahue being like basically like slap black women. I will never. That was.
She was a mess.
She was a mess. But remember, there were all those hoteps. Remember? Hoteps loved her.
The hoteps loved her, but also remember it was we had The Color Purple, and even though she was kind of 70s, like late 70s, we also had Michelle Wallace's book.
Yup. Yes.
So there was a burgeoning. So coming from the late 70s, I mean, even though it was early 70s, I think solidified Black feminism became solidified in the 80s.
Oh. Well, and where our, when I'm thinking like our childhood, although you and I didn't know, but the Combahee River statement, was 1977, so although we weren't exactly reading it at 8, but that was like, for me, I will never forget. The book that literally changed my life when I was in college was reading This Bridge Called My Back, Writings by Radical Women of Color, because that book literally was like, it's not me. Because, of course, society told me that I was the problem, that I couldn't fit into these boxes and all of this oppression. And it was like, no. And that
This
book
on my back, Homegirls.
Oh my God, Homegirls, the Black feminists. Audre Lorde. There is no hierarchy of oppression. That is, where people. Well, and let's be, people don't. 1990 was Kimberly Crenshaw, intersectionality. When that was when kind of like it came, that legal theory came out, like that analysis. So it was like. And of course, it had to come out from these arguments that were happening. Like, you can't just look at, like, not all women are going to experience sexism similarly.
The same way.
And of course, now it's kind of like, well, duh.
Like, duh, no shit. It's like, but no, like, that was a real argument. And also remember, this is when bell hooks came out. Was during this, the 80s.
Feminism is for everybody.
From margin to center, Black looks. Talking back, thinking feminist, thinking Black. Yes. I remember that was her time. That's when she was coming up too. So, and that was part of the bigger conversation when we were coming up about third wave feminism. A lot of what people know now came out of not only the arguments from second wave feminism, but it blossomed under third feminism. When you talk about sex positivity, third wave. That was a third wave not invention, but that was a third wave thing, because we were coming out of the porn wars and the very binary thinking that second wave feminism ended up being. I think there were like minutes. There were minutes and moments where people were like, but I do remember when I was co-coordinator of the Women's Center in my undergrad days. I remember there was this magazine, I forgot the name of it, but it was a very glossy magazine aimed at lesbians at the time. And this woman wrote a piece about how she slept with a man and she liked sleeping with men, but she called herself a lesbian. The letters to the editor went on for at least a good 4-5 issues, because that was a big thing. Like, no, you can't be a lesbian if you sleep with a man.
Yep.
And the idea of queer women and queerness and sexual fluidity was not being entertained. Not like we talk about now and even normalize it now. It was no. If you're a lesbian, you don't sleep with men. And at that time, there's also the political lesbian. It's like, you just don't want to be a lesbian. I mean, it was all of these other conversations. And Third Wave was like, hold up. This is not, wait, no, you can be a feminist and be femme. You can be a feminist and be you can be a lesbian and still want to sleep with a guy. You can be, it's all of these. So all of these, so the fluidities came into play during third wave feminism.
Yep.
And that's what we grew up in.
I'm just looking up that. I remember I wanted to see what year it was, but it was 1992 when Rebecca Walker wrote in Ms. Magazine calling Becoming the Third Wave. And then there was the book To Be Real. And that really was, there was all these essays. And that really was kind of like the naming, like, this is the third wave and this is, we're going to complicate it, and and now we're on, who knows how many waves we're on now.
I think we waved out.
I think people just realize that it's, but I think that, and I know that we're going to talk about second wave, because I have a complicated relationship with it, because I think that it had to go through it did what it did.
Yes.
It probably needed to be a little bit binary, given how we understood it at the time.
Yes. Howsoever, some of the stuff that came out of that was just ugly.
Well, Susan Brownmiller's Against Our Will, I mean, her piece on her chapter on Emmett Till, I find racist. Because literally she says he was trying to own this white woman and stuff like that. And it was like, he was a 14-year-old boy who now the white woman has said he didn't do anything.
Right. And so now I want to hear Susan Brownmiller's reason. I'm like, so now that we understand that.
But it's like, it's, even though she's like, oh, he didn't deserve to die, but it's like, well, remember, that was also before any understanding of kyriarchy. They believed that all women were oppressed by all men. And it was like, so a 14-year-old black boy is going to
oppress a grown-ass white woman.
Yeah, exactly. So it's like, you know what? No, sorry, folks. So,
I think what was really great about the Combahee River Collective and Black feminists was that they kind of were like, no, we understand. They didn't use the word kyriarchy, but they were able to explain it. It's like, no, we are oppressed by Black men, by white women, and by white men. And they didn't call it that, but they're like, but we understand that these two, Black men and white women, occupy this particular space, and Black women occupy this particular space, and white men occupy this particular space. And Black men and white women occupy it in such a way that, no, they're not white men, but they also know that the oppressed can be the oppressor. That's kind of what Black feminism was able to introduce. And then, of course, now we put a word to it, kyriarchy. So
exactly.
Right.
Exactly. Even though folks still stay not wanting to use that term, but you and I, and you especially, I'm so proud. You're like, I'm going to say using that term because it makes sense.
It makes sense. And because I also think people don't like it because it kind of names them. Intersectionality says you are oppressed a certain way. Kyriarchy says you oppress a certain way. And I think that's why white women don't like to be called Karens. Yeah. It's the new racist word. It's like, no, what Karen says is that it calls out your kyriarchy, is that, yes, you are oppressed. Yes. But you are also very oppressive. And we have all the videos and all the receipts to show that. And that's why kyriarchy is a very useful word. But like I said, I think people don't like it because it calls out the way that they're not complicit. And people want to be people, and especially now with social media, everybody wants to be the good person in all ways. Not like they never did some bullshit in their life. Not that they never been fatphobic or homophobic or transphobic. Everybody was good all the time, especially on social media. Because like what this one guy said, once you're off social media, you're crypto, meaning that nobody knows who you are once you're off social media. But on social media, you can come up with this whole persona. And you can say, I've been good and I've been righteous on all the issues and you are wrong, and we can do outrage. And so that's what that's about. But no, curiarchy is useful.
Well, and you know, doing this work, you know, I'm a social justice educator, my PhD's in it. So I get so annoyed that this idea of good versus bad, like it's not about being good. It's about that we have internalized a system. So of course we're all going to act out of it. And
even when we're doing the work, we're still, you know, we're going to get our moment.
Well, in all people can act, we can internalize our own oppression.
Yep.
I mean, you and I have talked about, we certainly know Black women who've been like, I don't like other Black women. Oh, oops. You might have worked with some.
Yes.
For some.
Yes.
You know, so it's like, you know, I mean, so it's like, but you're right. Everyone wants to be like, oh, I'm the victim of oppression, because then that feels good.
Right. And then I'm a good person.
I'm a good person instead of being. So that's one of the reasons, like when, you know, like, you know, I'll see like younger people, like younger Black folks being like, you know, Black men are the white men or the white people of the Black community. I'm like, no, you don't need to say that. Like, no, they just have privilege and it's unexamined, like most people. Like there are Black women who have privileges in other ways that are unexamined.
Exactly.
I've certainly met Black women who are Christian who have said some pretty ugly things about non-Christian people, or specifically atheist people and things like that, or fatphobic or transphobic and things.
Right.
I mean, the thing is, or even about your own group.
Yes. Or the other thing I was thinking about when you were saying that was the layering of oppression. I am the perfect person because I have all these oppressions. I'm Black, I'm female, I'm trans, I'm disabled, I'm this, I'm that. It's like, but you're still an asshole. So there was that was the flip of curiarchy too. It was like,
you know, that it makes you good. Asshole. Oppression only makes you oppressed. I'm sorry. That's all it does. It doesn't make you nice. It doesn't. In many ways, it could make you bitter and mean.
And we ran into folks like that.
Right wing. That's the thing, is that we, especially on the left, love to think that like it's naturally going to make you like empathetic toward other minoritized groups. No, because you could be like, oh, I'm going to get mine. I'm going to make sure. I think we see that with some Black capitalists who are like, I'm going to get mine.
Yep.
I think that certain folks that you've worked with, that we've talked about, Black folks who've been like, oh no, I'm going to get mine. Oh, I'm going to say that I'm
going to exploit my own. And I'm going to exploit the worst of, not the worst, but people who have less options than me. And I'm going to exploit them and call myself doing something.
And wrap it up in I'm uplifting the race. No, you're exploiting folks.
You're exploiting people. You're exploiting people without options. And you get mad with people who do have options. Right? So it's all, so again, that's why I like the word curiarchy. It gets to that. So, but yeah, there's all kinds of ways that works as far as oppression.
Yeah.
And, you know, thanks to curiarchy and the third wave. Hey.
It does.
So I just think that, so I think we have a lot to talk about. We're going to have a ton of fun.
We're going to talk. So just so folks know, we will be talking about this deep stuff, but you know what? We're also going to talk about
fluffy stuff.
I mean, we will go deep with it because that's just us. Like, so we're going to talk about those 70s shows and commercials that tried real hard. But, you know, now we look back and we're like, oh, bless their heart. They were trying to be all multiculti, and they didn't quite.
And you know, we shall overcome. They were really trying to embody.
And we'll give you one hint. The Native American guy, remember, with the trash and the wine.
Oh my God!
Who was really Italian, of course, but yeah.
But owned that. So he's like, no, I'm a Native American. He kept that up for the rest of his life. He's like, I am not Italian. I am Native American, and he died with that story on his lips. Died with it. We're going to talk about, like the Jeffersons, Different Strokes, all of those wonderful 80s shows. And we're probably going to talk about the soap operas from the 80s. It's like, so we're going to be talking about Dynasty and Dallas and Falcon Crest. I might even jump in and throw a couple things about romance novels as well.
Can we please talk about Flowers in the Attic and how deeply problematic that novel was?
You can't. I've never read those books. I've heard about them, so I'm going to trust your
It
judgment.
came out, I think I was 10 and I read it, and my aunt had to tell me, let's say my aunt had to say, he's reading a book about incest.
Look, my mom was still mad that I was reading a factually based book about sex and sexuality. And don't forget Judy Blume. Are you there, God? It's me, Margaret.
I was the only boy in my 6th grade class that was reading it because all my friends were girls. So I was like, they're reading it, I'm going to read it too. We have to talk about Judy Blume. So people need to give us, like, say what you want to hear us talk about, because there may be things that we're like, oh, we haven't thought about that in years.
Oh, absolutely. Because we're not the repositories of all things Gen X. So community, help us
Sesame
out.
Street Electric Company. We'll talk about
Zoom.
Zoom. Oh my God. Via Alegre.
Yes. Vegetable soup. I don't know. They were on drugs, but that was some cute stuff. I loved it.
We didn't get vegetable soup in Boston, so I don't know. Oh. So I was like, well, when I saw that, I was like, I don't remember vegetable soup, but I was like, oh, I did love me some Super Friends, though.
Yeah.
Although, can we talk about when they had the people of color come on? They were a little stereotypical, like Apache Chief and Samurai Warrior. Again, bless their heart. Trying.
And we were all like,
really?
We should be like righteously upset, but it's like, you have a soft spot for the stuff you have a soft spot for. Oh. And I think, even with 90s kids, some of that, the Saved by the Bell shit, I'm like, y'all were tripping. Smurfs, y'all were tripping.
My God, Smurfs, yeah, because you and I were just old enough that it was like, yeah, this was just like, okay, the Smurfs, it was like, that was a little weird. And
there
were all these male Smurfs and that one female Smurf, and I was like,
right,
what's going on? And
or the Great Space Coaster. I'm trying to think of things my sisters was watching. Yeah. We were down with 3-2-1 contact.
3-2-1. It was because it came out like I think we were in like 5th grade when it came out the first year. Do you know what I did love when I was babysitting when we became adults? I did love Wishbone though. That little dog. I'm sorry. Yes, I would watch PBS children's shows, but you know what?
Oh, what was my? Wait a minute. Wait, Pinwheel was my sister. Pinwheel spinning around. Look at my, and they have all these wonderful, strange animations. I was like, okay.
Yeah.
But yeah, so we're gonna talk about all of these things.
Moonlighting, 30-something. Why 18-year-olds were watching 30-something? I don't know why, but.
Right, like that's not us. What were we doing? What else?
They were like, rich. They were middle class white people, but we're all like 30-something. Yeah.
Right. Or Murphy Brown was another one.
Oh my God! But she was so political. I remember it was like, yeah.
Yeah. Or Kate and Allie. I'm trying to think of all the other shows. One Day at a Time.
One Day at a Time. But then we do have to talk about Little Black Children adopted by white people, Emmanuel and Different Strokes. Yeah,
absolutely. And what that was
and of course, Give Me a Break, Black Mamie for the 80s.
For the 80s, Facts of Life, and Tootie, and all those girls, and Tootie and Joe and Natalie, and how Tootie and Natalie got played. As far as their
Joe really was a lesbian, but they couldn't make her, but everyone knew.
Right. And also Living Single. Remember, we were the Living Single generation.
No, thank you. Friends, everyone's like, oh, Living Single was the Black Friends. No, Living Single was first.
So Friends was
the white Living
Single. And also in Living Color, we came up with Bad Humor.
Oh my God. That was, and you know what? That was groundbreaking. That was groundbreaking. That was, that was groundbreaking. Well, and we were kids, but it was the 70s, Saturday Night Live.
Yes.
Saturday Night Live, and some really amazing comics, John Belushi, Eddie Murphy.
Eddie Murphy.
I'm
We
Gumby,
were
damn
the
it.
Eddie Murphys. We were the Eddie Murphy generation.
Yeah, like
I don't
I'm
quite
Gumby,
remember.
damn it.
Right. I don't quite remember John Belushi,
Yeah,
but I
I
do
don't
remember
either.
Eddie Murphy.
Yes, I do. Like when he was when he played, who was the
Mr. Robinson's Neighborhood.
Mr. Robinson's
Gumby.
neighbor, and he played the little black child who was on Little Rascals.
Alfalfa.
No, the
Buckwheat, not alfalfa.
yeah, but
Buckwheat.
remember he's like, oh, Buckwheat singing songs and stuff like that. So
yes,
like he was the first one that really was pushing the envelope, like doing race-based humor. But so did Saturday Night Live. Like if you watch the early episodes, like when Richard Pryor was on,
absolutely. Garrett Morrison. Yep.
So I mean, we got a lot to talk about, folks.
Yeah, and y'all just sitting there playing Gen X like we ain't done nothing. Okay. We see you.
Thank you. We see you, and now you're gonna see us.
That's right. In between apartheid and John Hughes. So with all of that, we look forward to doing our next episode. And Chris, love you, man. See you soon.
Love you too, Andrea.
All right.
Okay.
Take care, everybody.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.